She checked in alone. March 27th, 2023, 27 years old, wearing a red flannel jacket, hiking boots caked in road dust, and a DSLR hanging from her shoulder like a lifeline. Claire Whitmore was quiet at the ranger station, polite but focused, signing the backcountry permit with a slight shake in her hand. She asked about the trail conditions in Lamar Valley and whether bear activity had picked up yet this season. The ranger glanced out the window, taking in the rising mist and patches of snow still stubborn along the tree line. "It's early. You'll have most of it to yourself," he told her. She nodded, almost as if that's what she was counting on. Her campsite request was unusual. Zone 6, a remote patch of land miles from the nearest established trail, accessible only by wading through streams swollen from meltwater and traversing switchbacks still half-iced from winter's breath. She told the ranger she'd be back in 3 days. She never returned. No one panicked at first. Spring was always strange, trails closed and reopened, hikers delayed, snowstorms flaring up out of nowhere. Rangers called it shoulder season, that strange in-between where everything's either thawing or hiding. Her car, a beat-up silver Subaru, sat undisturbed in the trailhead lot for 5 days before anyone noticed. Inside, a camp stove, 2 unopened granola bars, a notebook with rough sketches of trees, birds, and in the last pageant outline of a bear with pale eyes. When rangers hiked to her designated zone, they found the remnants of a fire ring, flattened grass where a tent had been, and boot prints leading north. No signs of struggle, no sign of Claire. It was like she'd packed up and walked off into the trees and vanished. She was listed as missing on April 20. A statement was issued. The park rangers launched a light search, assuming injury or disorientation. Her friends posted to Instagram. Her mother called from Missoula every morning. Claire Whitmore, 27, was gone. And Yellowstone, vast and ancient and indifferent, said nothing. Claire had always believed in silence, not the absence of noise, but the kind of quiet that settled in your chest when the world stood still. After the breakup, a 7-year relationship that ended with a suitcase on the curb and a voicemail that started with, "Don't be mad," she'd stopped speaking to most people. Yellowstone was the first word she said out loud in weeks. She'd circled it on a map in her apartment in Portland, one trembling fingertip tracing the contours of a park older than memory. She wasn't just running. She was chasing something. Photography had always been her through line, the lens she used to understand chaos. She wasn't interested in tourist shots or Instagram views. Claire wanted truth, the kind of raw, aching honesty that only wild places still held. Her goal was a photo series called The Unseen, a catalog of predators that rarely showed themselves: cougars, wolves, and the pale grizzly she'd heard stories about on Reddit forums and obscure wildlife threads. Locals whispered about it. No tags, no sightings in official records. Just a rumor, a white bear with scars on its face, said to follow hikers for miles without sound. Claire had printed the map herself, plotted her route through the valley and into the forests, where roads became suggestions and the wind carried its own stories. But Yellowstone wasn't just a destination, it was a boundary. Between who she had been, girlfriend, assistant editor, daughter of a pastorand, who she might become, someone still willing to believe in something impossible. She journaled in half-sentences, sketches, and clipped thoughts scribbled in the margins. "Need distance," one entry read. Another, "If I catch it in the frame, it's real." She wasn't reckless. She had gear, training, backups. She filed an itinerary, bought new boots, practiced setting up her tent in her living room. But what she underestimated wasn't the weather or terrain. It was the weight of quiet when it turns to absence. Yellowstone, in early spring, isn't made for people. It's made for things that don't need permission to survive. Claire entered the park at 9:12 a.m. Her camera battery was full. Her smile was small. She had 3 days of supplies, a sense of purpose, and a target she couldn't name. What she found out there, if she found anything at all, would never make it back. It was a slow morning in the ranger office when someone noticed the permit: Claire Whitmore, Backcountry Zone 6, entry March 27th, duration 3 days, no checkout signature, no exit record. The form was buried in a logbook under a stack of seasonal reports, marked as solo hiker, moderate experience. Just another line in a system that rarely looks back. 6 months had passed. Now it was October. Yellowstone was shifting again, first snowfall settling into the ridges like frostbite. A seasonal ranger flipping through the logbook for unrelated paperwork noticed her name. He didn't recognize it, but the date caught his attention. March. No exit. He radioed it in. It wasn't the first time someone had vanished in Yellowstone, but it was rare for it to go unnoticed this long. Her Subaru was still listed as abandoned vehicle, Zone 6 trailhead, towed 2 months earlier. No theft, no foul play, just a ghost car with out-of-state plates and unpaid parking citations. When they pulled her backcountry permit, they saw her signature again. Neat, deliberate, as if she knew it might be her last. That afternoon, a junior ranger cross-referenced the name. Claire had no local emergency contact listed, just her mother in Montana and an old email address. The ranger looked at the calendar. 6 months. The weather had already turned cruel. If she was still out there, she wasn't alive. But something else might be. They sent a small team the next morning, 2 rangers, 1 dog, and a first aid trained volunteer. It was standard protocol for overdue hiker reports, check trailheads, scan for fresh activity, maybe stumble on gear or bones. But Yellowstone doesn't give up its secrets easily. The temperature hovered just below freezing, wind carving sideways across the valley floor. Snowmelt had turned the lower trails to sludge, and cloud cover cut visibility in half. They found the spot where Claire had registered to camp, a patch of scorched earth beneath a ring of pine, a blackened stone fire ring, trampled grass, no tent poles, no food wrappers, just silence. Her tracks, if they'd ever existed, were long erased by seasons. The dog picked up a faint scent in one direction, then circled back, confused. No blood, no gear, no signs of wildlife activity around the site, just a stillness that felt unnatural. One ranger, a seasoned tracker, later described it as wrong, quiet. He couldn't explain it. No bird song, no squirrel chatter, not even whine through the pines. Just pressure like the forest was holding its breath. They scouted the area for 6 hours. By dusk, the search was called off as inconclusive. No signs of Claire, no signs of struggle. Nothing to suggest she'd ever been there at all, except her name, inked on a piece of paper. 6 months too late. Something had taken her. The question was no longer if, it was how, and more disturbingly why. Lamar Valley is where Yellowstone breathes wide, open, endless. Herds of bison migrate like ghosts across the sagebrush plains. Wolves hunt in the dawn fog. Elk bugle into the wind. And just beyond the ridge, hidden in folds of earth no map marks cleanly, are geothermal vents that can melt bone. This was where Claire was headed. Her permit listed a loop that cut through Lamar's western edge, skirting a backcountry geothermal zone marked unmaintained. It's the kind of place that swallows noise, where the sky is too big and the ground seems alive. A place where mistakes become permanent. Veteran rangers knew better than to take Lamar lightly. Spring in the valley meant hungry grizzlies emerging from hibernation, unpredictable weather swings, and boiling pools of water hidden beneath a thin crust of land. GPS signals get patchy. Footpaths disappear under runoff. They found no tent, no camera, no body, but satellite imaging later showed something strange. A thermal distortion recorded in Zone 6 at 3:14 a.m. on March 30th. One large heat signature, followed by a much smaller one, vanishing completely within 30 seconds. Claire's name wasn't on the report. It was never flagged. Until now. It was a Tuesday when Claire's mother called the Park Service. She hadn't heard from her daughter in 5 days, not unusual for a wilderness trip, but Claire always texted when she was out. Always. "I know something's wrong," her mother said. Her voice was strained but clear, sharpened by maternal instinct and months of silence. The ranger on the line tried to reassure her. Sometimes hikers forget to check in, but there was hesitation in his voice. Claire had told her mother she'd be back in cell range by March 31st. It was now April 4th. The Subaru had been sitting at the trailhead for days, sighted but not investigated. No alerts. No alerts because no one had asked. The report was finally escalated. A Level 1 search and rescue was launched, boots on the ground, aerial sweeps, scent tracking dogs, and thermal drones. But they were already working uphill. 6 months late. Her father drove in from Missoula. He waited in the ranger station lobby for 9 hours, clutching a photo of Claire in hiking gear, her hair windblown, her smile half-formed. "She's not careless," he told them. "She's not the type to vanish." And yet, she had. The official notice went out that evening. Missing person, Claire Whitmore. Last seen, March 27th, entering Lamar Valley. Status: unknown. What no one said out loud but everyone was thinking was this: Yellowstone doesn't lose people. It keeps them. Search teams combed the valley for 3 days. Drones buzzed overhead, dogs barked, circled, then whimpered. Helicopters traced wide loops across the sky, their shadows sweeping the ground like searchlights. And yet, nothing. Zone 6 was mapped in grids and cross-referenced with satellite imaging. Creeks were probed, caves were entered. Every ranger out there knew the signs to look for: discarded gear, disturbed soil, shredded clothing, blood. But Claire had vanished so cleanly. It was like the earth itself had swallowed her whole. Then, on the second day, they found it. A clearing tucked beneath a ridge. Her campsite. The tent was collapsed on one side, partially staked. Her sleeping pad still inflated. Inside the tent, a backpack half unzipped, a single hiking boot, a sealed granola wrapper, and her field notebook open, the ink warped by old moisture. But what unsettled the rangers most was what wasn't there. No bear canister. No camera. No second boot. Her gear looked like someone had been in the middle of packing and simply stopped. No signs of struggle, no damage. It was as if Claire had calmly stood up and walked out of her life. The journal was recovered later that evening, carefully sealed in an evidence bag and passed to the incident commander. It was a standard field notebook, weatherproof, wire-bound, filled with sketches, timestamps, and shorthand notes about wildlife sightings. But beneath the surface-level entries, a pattern emerged. In the margins, Claire had been tracking something she never mentioned to anyone. Possible bear sighting, 3:28, white, larger than average. Watched me from 200 yards, didn't move. Same pale shape again, 3:29, near geothermal ridge. Eye shine? Not sure. Locals call it the pale ghost. No official records. Uncollared. The entries became more frantic as the days progressed. It knows I'm here. It doesn't blink. Camera malfunctioning. Switching batteries. I need the shot. Claire wasn't just photographing Yellowstone. She was hunting something, mythic something, undocumented. The pale ghost had been an old rumor among backcountry rangers, whispered after too many drinks or shared quietly over campfires. A bear too smart to tag, too elusive to track. Albino, white, seen only when it wanted to be. Claire had found it. Or it had found her. And her last journal entry, scrawled messily across the bottom of the final page, said only this: "One more photo. Then I leave." But she never left, and her camera was missing. So was she. After the search, the forest felt different. The wind carried something it hadn't before, an edge. The rangers didn't talk about it publicly. Not in reports, not to journalists. But privately, in the mess halls and around the fire pits, they began to whisper. Whispers about things they'd seen or thought they'd seen. A shape too tall to be bear, too fast to be human. Footprints that began in the middle of nowhere and ended in thin air. Game trails gone silent for days. Elk carcasses stripped of meat but untouched by scavengers. One backcountry hiker reported waking up to the sound of breathing just outside his tent, slow, deliberate, inhuman. When he unzipped it at dawn, there were no tracks. Just a single white hair, coarser than a bear's, caught on the tent's mesh flap. Another couple came into a ranger station pale as snow, claiming they heard someone calling their names in the Foganly. They were 8 miles off trail and hadn't told anyone where they were going. And then there were the old stories, ones the newer rangers chalked up to folklore and campfire nerves. The native Shoshone once spoke of a spirit in the valley, Yapi Quinn, the White Watcher. Not evil exactly, but territorial, vengeful if disrespected. It lived where heat rose from the ground and the trees grew twisted. Claire's last known location sat squarely in that zone. No one said it directly, but the rumor was this: Claire Whitmore had seen something she wasn't meant to, and it had seen her back. 2 weeks after the first drone launch, the official search was called off. There was no announcement, no press conference, just a quiet memo circulated through the Yellowstone SAR command. Subject: Claire Whitmore. Status: presumed lost. Exposure: wildlife. Case closed pending new evidence. Her mother wept when she heard, not because she believed Claire was gone, but because the system had stopped looking. The Park Service archived the file. Her gear was bagged and boxed. The journal was copied, sealed, and filed. Her Subaru was released to her family, who left it parked outside a storage unit in Bozeman like a monument. Volunteers kept searching for wild old-timers, wilderness guides, people who don't believe in closure until there's a body. But nothing turned up. Not a thread. Not a bone. Summer came, tourists returned, the trails dried out, and just like that, Claire's disappearance became part of Yellowstone's long memory. One more missing hiker, one more family left with silence. But those who had been part of the search, the ones who walked the same ridges, felt the wrongness in the trees they didn't forget. Because cases go cold. But in Yellowstone, cold doesn't mean dead. It just means waiting. Snowmelt came late that year. The peaks still wore white-like armor in early October, and the creeks ran high and wild. Most of the park's backcountry remained inaccessible mud, runoff, downed trees. But rangers still patrolled the boundaries. That's when they found it. Zone 6 was closed to the public, marked no access due to geothermal instability. Rangers knew the land there was dangerous crust that could break beneath your feet, steam vents hot enough to burn flesh to bone in seconds. No one hiked it. No one was supposed to. But on the morning of October 9th, 2 rangers were scanning for geothermal flare activity near the ridge south of Lamar when they caught sight of something slumped across a half-frozen slope. It was an elk, or what was left of one. The carcass was too fresh. Blood still wet in the dirt, steam rising off the open cavity. But what stopped them wasn't the kill itself. It was the condition of the body. The elk's ribcage had been cracked wide, not by scavengers, but methodically as if pried apart. Its organs were missing, and something had been placed inside the chest cavity. The rangers stared in stunned silence. Not at the gore, but at the object sticking out of the elk's sternum like a bone-colored tumor. A corner of a clear plastic bag. It took gloves, 2 field knives, and more courage than either ranger would admit to retrieve the object. The plastic was sealed, double-bagged. Old blood had dried around the edges, but the interior was untouched. Inside, the bag wrapped in a faded bandana and packed with strips of cloth for cushioning was a black DSLR camera. Claire's camera. They knew it instantly. The serial number matched the missing person report. Her initials were scratched into the bottom edge. Faint, but unmistakable. CW. But the question wasn't how it got there. The question was who put it there and why. The elk had died recently within 24 hours, according to wildlife experts. But Claire had been missing for 6 months. The camera was intact, protected, deliberately packed. Not dropped. Not lost. Delivered. Back at the ranger station, no one spoke for a long time. Then one of them said it out loud. Who the hell puts a camera inside a dead animal? There was no answer. Only the knowledge that Yellowstone had just given something back. And it was time to see what was on that camera. The investigation stalled before it even began. The elk had no bullet wounds, no predator signs. Its spine was intact, but the rib cage was cracked, like someone had opened it from the inside. Rangers consulted biologists, field ecologists, even forensic pathologists. None had seen anything like it. No one could explain how a camera Claire Whitmore's camera had ended up sealed inside a fresh carcass 6 months after her disappearance. Had a scavenger dragged it there? No tracks, no drag marks. Was it buried by a person? Then why not leave it somewhere obvious? And why pack it so carefully? Preserve it from the blood and rot, and nest it inside a body like a message in a bottle made of bone. One ranger suggested it was symbolic, like a ritual. Another said nothing but didn't sleep that night. The incident report was vague by design. Recovered personal effects, found in proximity to animal remains. Possible human interference. No mention of how it was recovered. No mention of what came next. Because the moment that memory card slid into a reader, everything changed. The camera was crusted with old resin and dried blood. But the body was intact, the screen still functional. The battery had corroded, but the memory card miraculously was recoverable. The card was warped. Heat damage. Water damage. A tech from the Park Service's forensics unit spent 8 hours just coaxing it to mount. But when it did, it showed a single folder. DCM6, 110. Claire. Inside, 120 images. The first 100 were what you'd expect from a backcountry hiker: landscapes, animal tracks, wide shots of the valley at sunset. A photo of a coyote in motion. A close-up of pine bark scratched with fresh claw marks. Selfies, too. Claire smiling faintly against distant storm clouds. Then the final 12. Each one more unsettling than the last. The framing changed. No more landscapes, just dark, tilted images, blurred shapes. Flash reflecting in eyes too high off the ground. One image showed Claire's face up close, panic in her eyes, her lips open mid-breath. Another, completely dark, with a red blur across one edge. The 10th photo showed trees warped by distortion like the air itself was folding. The 11th? Just a shadow. Massive, towering. The 12th? A single frame. A pair of eyes white, unblinking, glowing faintly in the flash staring back from the tree line. No animal had eyes like that. No bear stood upright that tall. No human had pupils shaped like slits. The timestamp on the last image? March 30th, 3:14 a.m. The exact moment a thermal flare had been recorded 6 months earlier, Zone 6. Claire had seen it. She had taken its picture. And now, something had brought the proof back. The last image was the one no one could forget. At first glance, it looked like a mistake, blurry, off-center, taken in a panic. The flash had caught tree trunks in mid-sway, mist curling low to the ground like fog made of breath. But in the top right corner, just beyond the reach of the flash, something stared back. 2 orbs, pale, unnaturally bright. Eyes. Too high to belong to a coyote, too wide set to be a person, and not the kind of reflection you get from a deer or wolf. These glowed from within. The photo was analyzed, enhanced, light balanced, pixels interpolated. No animal biologist could make sense of it. No known predator matched the spacing, height, or geometry of the features. One ranger off the record said it looked like something watching the person holding the camera. Not curious, not startled, just waiting. Word spread through the ranger community faster than the report. They'd seen similar stories, campers describing eyes in the woods that didn't blink, disappearances near geothermal vents, livestock found intact, untouched, but missing their eyes. Some called it coincidence. Others gave it a name, the pale ghost. No proof, no tracks. Only this photo, grainy, silent, horrifying. It was Claire's last known act. She had turned. She had raised her camera. She had clicked the shutter. And then, whatever stared back, came closer. Investigators tried to anchor the timeline. They wanted facts, numbers, science. They pulled weather data from March 27, 30, cross-referenced barometric pressure with light conditions, lined up sunrise charts against the timestamps on Claire's camera. Every GPS ping was logged. But something didn't fit. Claire's camera said she took her last photo at 3:14 a.m., March 30th. The thermal drone used by geologists monitoring geothermal shifts captured a heat bloom in Zone 6 at that same minute. But the temperature spike? It lasted less than 10 seconds, then vanished. No animal moves like that. No human moves that fast. And there was another anomaly. One of Claire's earlier photos taken on what should have been her second day showed sunlight streaming over a ridge. The timestamp said 6:23 a.m. But according to solar records for that day, sunrise in Lamar Valley wasn't until 6:58. Claire had somehow photographed sunlight before it existed. For a brief moment, the team considered equipment failure. But the camera clock had stayed consistent the entire trip. The only conclusion was one no one wanted to speak aloud. The timeline wasn't broken, reality was. Time didn't flow the way it should in those woods. Claire's last days were not counted in hours. They were counted in warnings. And now that the camera had returned, the countdown had begun again. The photos told a different story than the case file. Official reports estimated Claire survived 2-3 days in the wild, based on supplies, weather conditions, standard backcountry survival models. But her camera told the truth. Buried in metadata was something no one expected: timestamps stretching beyond March 30th. Photos dated April 20, April 3rd, April 5th. If accurate, Claire had lived for 9 full days after her disappearance. Alone, cold, stalked by something she couldn't outrun. One photo, taken April honest, showed her hand in the foreground, bandaged with torn fabric, holding a cracked compass. Behind her, clouds over a distant ridgeline. The scene was barren, windblown. And beneath the clouds, something else. A sliver of white. Zooming in, analysts found a shape on a distant slope. A form. Motion blurred. It wasn't a tree. And it wasn't Claire. Even more disturbing, her photos grew increasingly erratic, angles, askew, lighting inconsistent, like she was snapping them blindly, in panic or desperation. She had survived longer than anyone imagined, which meant she had seen more. And horribly, it meant something later. The 23rd photo in the corrupted sequence had been mostly ignored until a forensic analyst ran it through luminance enhancement. At first, it appeared unremarkable. A tangle of trees, fallen logs, the grainy gray of early twilight. But then they saw it. Just left of center, crouched low to the ground, between two trees, was a figure. Too narrow to be a bear, too large for a person. The arms were long, hands splayed against the dirt. The head was tilted not like it was hiding, but listening, watching. Claire hadn't mentioned it in her journal. No "saw it again" note, no drawn diagrams. But the photos didn't lie. The figure didn't appear in earlier images of the same area. And in a later one snapped just seconds after it was gone. One investigator stared at the screen for nearly 10 minutes before whispering, "That's not an animal." They tried mapping the location, matching the trees to satellite data. No match. The angle didn't make sense either. The shot looked down, as if Claire had climbed or been lifted. Was she photographing it, or was it letting her see? The case shifted again from tragedy to something else. Claire wasn't just lost. She had been hunted. And now, the camera was showing them exactly what had hunted her. Armed with new evidence, a specialized team was deployed back into Zone 6. This time, they weren't looking for a lost hiker. They were looking for something else entirely. The air had changed. It was early October, but the trees were already bare, the ground unusually dry. The forest felt hollow quiet, but not peaceful. Just 1 mile from Claire's last known location, they found claw marks. High 9 feet off the ground, deep grooves in the bark, fresh, almost surgical. No known predator in Yellowstone climbs and claws that high. Then came the bones. Scattered across a clearing were the remains of multiple animals: rabbits, squirrels, a fox, even a young deer. Not scavenged, not eaten. Arranged. The pattern was geometric, circular. Spine fragments lined up like spokes, a skull placed at the center of it all, facing east. Veteran rangers exchanged glances. Some refused to go further. One quietly crossed himself. "It's a warning," someone muttered. The official report listed it as unusual predatory behavior. But off the record, they knew better. Predators kill to eat. This was something else. That night, the rangers set up camp just outside the geothermal perimeter. 3 tents, 1 thermal drone overhead, 2 motion-triggered cameras facing the tree line. By midnight, the first reports came in. A rustling light, rhythmic just beyond the tents. Then a low sound, somewhere between a growl and a whisper. Not quite a voice, but shaped like words. One ranger stepped out with a spotlight and swept it across the trees. Nothing. But the whispering didn't stop. It just shifted, circling the camp like wind moving with purpose. Then the thermal drone lit up. A massive heat signature, humanoid in form, standing motionless at the edge of the forest. Height, approximately 9 feet. The drone operator zoomed in. The feed flickered. The figure turned slowly. No visible face, just glowing heat where a head should be. And then gone. No motion, no retreat, just static. The feed dropped to black. It had vanished mid-recording. The drone's diagnostics were fine, batteries full, sensors functional. The operator simply said, "It knew we were watching." Whatever Claire saw, it was still out there. And now, it knew they were coming. 3 days into the renewed search, a ranger noticed something strange near the edge of a geothermal slopia hollowed tree with burn scars along the base, like it had been struck by lightning. Inside the hollow, tucked behind dead bark and ash, was a small, weather-worn leather notebook. Frozen stiff, pages fused at the corners. It was Claire's. Her handwriting had shifted. Early entries were structured, neat, hiking notes, weather logs, trail sketches. But later pages turned disjointed, panicked, dreamlike. "I hear it walking at night. It circles the camp but never touches the tent. The trees are moving, but there's no wind. I lost time today. The sun moved too fast." The most chilling line was scribbled sideways across the margin of a nearly blank page. "The forest hums at night." She repeated the phrase several times, like a mantra, or a warning. The last page had only 3 words, barely legible beneath smudged ink and something darker, possibly blood. "It watches alone." The journal was sealed as evidence. But even the most skeptical ranger admitted, Claire hadn't just gotten lost. Something had unraveled her from the inside out. To ground the hysteria, The Park Service brought in Dr. Sam Diera, seasoned wildlife biologist, known for his work on aggressive bear behavior. He reviewed the data: the claw marks, the elk carcass, the heat signature. His conclusion? Possibly a hyper-aggressive albino grizzly, genetically isolated, unusually intelligent, and deeply territorial. Claire might have stumbled into its domain during early emergence from hibernation. The odd behavior? Stress-induced. The carcass patterns? Bear caching rituals, albeit highly abnormal. The claw marks? Intimidation displays. But even he admitted, the heights too extreme, the intelligence too directed, and the camera inside the elk, that's not bear behavior, that's something else. Off the record, Dyer confided to a ranger, if it's a bear, it's the smartest one on Earth. If it's not, then we're not dealing with anything in the textbooks. The park posted the theory as official. But those who'd seen the footage, the eyes in the trees, the circle of bones, they stopped calling it a bear. They started calling it something older. Forensics were clear. The elk was freshly killed. The body temperature at the time of discovery was still elevated. Tissue breakdown indicated death had occurred less than 24 hours earlier, a window far too narrow for coincidence. The camera, still wrapped in cloth and sealed in Ziploc plastic, was untouched by blood inside. Whoever or whatever had inserted it had been deliberate, careful. There were no bite marks, no signs of scavenging. No predators had fed. The rib cage had been split vertically, not torn, as if by massive hands, not claws pulling it apart. The placement wasn't hasty, it was ritualistic. Positioned deep in the body cavity, wrapped to preserve, then covered in muscle and viscera like a burial shroud. Rangers had never seen anything like it. Neither had the forensic techs. One biologist finally said what everyone was thinking. This wasn't a kill, it was a message. A message left in blood and bone. Claire's proof, returned not by nature, but by something that understood intent. Faced with mounting contradictions, the Park Service turned to local knowledge. They met with Crow tribe elders from nearby communities, keepers of oral history, far older than any ranger map or wildlife database. When they described the events, the eye shine, the humming forest, the bones, the camera inside the elk, the room fell silent. Then one elder spoke a single word. Wakuti, the Watcher. In Crow tradition, Wakuti was a guardian spirit tied to the land. It protected sacred spaces, watched the migration of animals, ensured balance. But when disrespected, when sacred boundaries were crossed or old pacts forgotten, Wakuti turned. Not malevolent, not a monster, but something ancient, patient, and without mercy. Stories spoke of travelers hearing drumming in the trees, of being watched by something that didn't need to move to follow you. People who went too deep, too far, and came back hollow, or didn't come back at all. The forest doesn't lose people, one elder said. It keeps the ones who forget to ask permission. The ranger who heard those words didn't sleep that night. Because Claire hadn't just vanished. She had walked into something sacred and kept going. It wasn't listed among the photo files. No thumbnail, no preview, just a nameless .mov file buried in the card's corrupted sectors. The recovery team almost missed it, just 20 seconds of damaged footage, stitched together by chance. No metadata, no timestamp. Only a title. Rebuild 1.mov. It began in total darkness. Whined against the microphone. Heavy, uneven breathing. Then the image staggered into view, shaky, horizontal, bouncing with each step. A flashlight beam jittering through trees, catching brief flashes of Claire's face. She was crying, whispering. It's in the trees. It's in the trees. It watches me breathe. The camera spun, a rush of branches, a flicker of white motion across the edge of the frame. Then stillness. Claire crouched low, face lit by her own flashlight, eyes wild. Her voice dropped to a whisper that sounded like prayer. Please, please let me leave. Then something loud, low, like a growl wrapped in static rose behind her. She turned. The screen filled with motion gray, hulking, silent hand, then cut to black. No ending, no scream, no signal loss. Just black. And yet the file had survived, as if meant to. Preserved, planted, found. Claire's last transmission. Not for help, but as a warning. Her final full journal entry was unlike the rest. Written in a trembling hand across the inner back cover, it had none of the careful structure, no timestamps, no location markers. Just a raw, desperate stream of consciousness. I tried to turn around. The forest moved. The light bends here. I think it knows I'm not supposed to be here. It doesn't chase. It waits. Then, on a line by itself scrawled, underlined, and smeared, "If someone finds this, I went too far." And below that, I looked into its eyes. Rangers who read it later described an overwhelming sense of pressure, like the words weren't meant to be read, only left behind. She had crossed a threshold geographic, spiritual, or something stranger, and the act of looking had sealed her fate. Whatever watched Claire in those woods didn't need to hunt. It only needed to be seen. And once it was, you never left the forest the same. The official stance was clear. Claire Whitmore's case was closed. Presumed deceased due to environmental exposure. Wildlife involvement probable. The press release was brief, sanitized. The camera was labeled inconclusive. The journal non-verifiable. No mention of the elk, no mention of the footage, no mention of eyes in the trees. But within the park, tension was building. You could feel it in the silence over radios, in how rangers avoided certain patrol zones, in the whispered warnings to new staff, "Don't go into Zone 6 alone, ever." Some accepted the official narrative and needed to, for their own peace. Others didn't, especially those who had seen the footage, who had read Claire's final words. Ranger Colin Mercer was the loudest voice among them. A 10-year veteran of Yellowstone's deep backcountry detail, calm under pressure, rational to a fault until this case. After the drone failure, after the recovered journal, Mercer stopped sleeping. He pored over the case files every night, tracing Claire's route over and over on outdated topo maps. To him, the case wasn't closed. It had only just begun. On a cold morning in mid-November, Colin Mercer checked out a GPS unit, a week's worth of rations, and 2 trail cams without logging a route. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. But the maps on his desk told the truth. He was going back to Zone 6. 2 days in, he radioed a single message. "Found something, not sure what I'm looking at yet." Then silence. A recovery team was dispatched. They followed his last GPS ping to a ravine near the geothermal ridge zone no ranger had entered in over a decade. There, they found Mercer's pack leaning against a tree. Nearby, Claire's missing sleeping bag, torn at the seams and stained with something dark. And just beyond that, footprints. Human. Barefoot. No shoes, no socks. 5 toes. Impossibly fresh. There were no other signs of Mercer. No body. No gear. Only the footprints leading uphill into dense brush. As if someone or something had walked calmly away. And the soil where the prints ended? Still warm. Colin Mercer was never seen again. 3 days after his last contact, his emergency beacon activated briefly, then went dark. A garbled signal crackled through the ranger frequency just once, before silence. "I see it, it's not a bear." Search teams were deployed. Same procedures, same zones. This time, they were faster, more desperate. But it didn't matter. No gear, no body, no trail. Only static in the trees, and the sensation unshakable among the searchers that something was watching them from just beyond the light. A second disappearance. 2 people, same forest, same silence. But unlike Claire, Colin had gone in knowing what was waiting. And still, it took him. One ranger resigned the next day. Another transferred out of state. And those who stayed stopped going near Zone 6 unless absolutely necessary. Some maps were redrawn, trails quietly rerouted. Officially, nothing had changed. Unofficially, everything had. The photo went viral. Snapped by a tourist on a fall morning, it was meant to be a scenic shot: sunrise through the pines, mist pooling in the lowlands. But in the upper right corner, barely visible unless you zoomed in, a white shape, upright, still, watching from the trees. Too tall, too narrow. The outline matched something else, a silhouette from a corrupted frame, a shadow from Claire's camera. Comment threads erupted with theories, CGI, pareidolia, hoax. But rangers knew better. The few who had seen the original files never commented. They didn't need to, because Claire Whitmore's story had become something else. No longer just a missing persons case, but a legend. Her journal, her photos, her final whisper caught in static. "It's in the trees." They were warnings, not from a victim, but from someone who saw beyond the veil. People still visit Yellowstone every year, thousands of them. Most stay on the trails. Some wander too far. And once in a while, someone comes back different. Or doesn't come back at all. But they all know her name. Claire Whitmore. The woman who vanished in Yellowstone, and the final words from the documentary that would follow. She vanished in Yellowstone, but something came back with her camera. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.